Okay, here we are. We have a special conversation with Will Ruddick from Grassroots Economics. I'm Antonio, hosting the ETH Puerto Rico meetup. Just want to give a quick introduction to what ETH is. So we host events, both educational and networking, here on the island. And we also have a DAO set up. So we are basically trying to dog food and learn how to use these tools. So this DAO is for managing the ETH Puerto Rico group. And yeah, so we're learning a lot in terms of governance and how to do token engineering. And ideally, the community can grow using these like new frameworks. So we're recording all of our meetings on YouTube, so we can kind of keep track of our progress and share it with the community. And then hopefully, once the garden is more stable, we can bring on more users. So with that, just want to say thank you to Will for joining. I know we've had like some conversations on Twitter that have been really exciting and engaging, and it's really hard to like have a meaningful conversation, you know, in 140 characters. So happy you could join us. And I think there's a lot to learn, especially as Puerto Rico is dealing with its own, you know, fiscal and governance issues. So we can dive into, I guess, more like local solutions later, but I kind of wanted to just let you introduce yourself and the work you're doing, and then we could probably take like a technical deep dive, and then end up with some Q&A or any other important items.
Cool. All right, thanks for having me. Yeah, Will Ruddick. I'm just the founder of Grassroots Economics, and we're a foundation that basically focuses on helping communities develop their own means of exchange. Generally, we take that as collections of service and different sort of service providers coming together, acknowledging that they have sort of in common these resources, you know, their time and goods and services that they have to offer, and then basically kind of resource mapping and creating a collective around that, and creating a credit obligation around those resources, which is really like a promise or an IOU. It's not a commodity in the sense where, you know, Donald Duck could sit on them and have a big pile of them. It's a living agreement, and so like these groups of people get together and come up with that. And you know what we've been in the blockchain space for quite a while, and we basically kind of tried to and are still, you know, in the process of kind of pulling out all of the sort of like auction-based pricing and volatility that's created in a lot of these types of ecosystems. And I mean, right now we're using Open Ethereum and Aurora consensus and just pulling out the auction-based pricing around gas and just making that a service token as well. So like the way we approach Web3 is the same way we approach a village as a decentralized network of service providers, right? They might be providing tomatoes, they might be providing transport services, they might be providing nodes in a local ledger system. On the data layer, we're using Swarm. I mean, anyways, I've already started deep diving there. Let me pause and see if there's any. Anthony, do you want me to just keep going?
I mean, we can freestyle. I don't know if you had any like presentation, but I feel like you have enough stories to tell for a long time.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll just kind of I'll reiterate a little bit of like how we got to where we are, but I mean, just pipe in if you've got like specific questions, and then I'll pause and whatnot. But yeah, like originally, so I was a physicist that got into like econophysics back in the day, and started doing agent-based modeling, and I was much happier in economics than I was in physics. And I started studying community currencies pretty early on. I was always kind of an activist living on communes and that sort of stuff. And I eventually joined the Peace Corps, which is like a volunteer organization, and ended up in Kenya, and basically kind of worked with community groups out here, like groups of businesses and local chiefs and elders to look at what other communities were doing. So we watched a lot of videos of Brazil, like Bancos Palmas and Berkshires and Berkshire, Massachusetts, and cells and lets throughout Europe, and kind of came up with basic models on how we would try things. And that was the first thing when I did. It was about 10 years ago. It's called EcoPesa. There's a journal. There's a journal called, it was called back then IJCCR. Now it's called Ramix for community currencies, which is a great resource if you're interested in that stuff. And there's a paper on EcoPesa if you look it up. And basically, like, the model back then was, hold a bunch of cash in reserve, issue tokens against that cash for, and these were paper back then, little pieces of paper, like security printed, and issue them for like community, like environmental actions. So we would do like waste collection events, and people would do sorting and whatnot, and try to clear out a lot of these kind of like malaria prone areas that are like, there's all these mosquitoes and there's huge amounts of trash that, the city's never cleared around Mombasa. And so we just clearing a lot of that, and then doing tree planting and stuff. And we did, it was amazing. Like the businesses around the community came together to organize these events, because they would then accept the vouchers from all the people doing the waste collection, and then they would trade them with each other as well over time. And every month we would buy back like $5 from those vendors. And so that was a really simple model. And eventually we bought back all that currency, and that was the end of that program. And so that was my first way of sort of like just kind of putting my foot in the water and testing that. And from then on, I really wanted to do systems where the currency would stay circulating, and so that was a nice test. It was basically a fully backed, fully reserved backed voucher, backed by national currency. And then we went into fully backed vouchers by just goods and services. And so in that case, we at that time, it was like me with a few volunteers. We started a community-based organization, and it wasn't until like 2015 that we started. We changed the name to Grassroots Economics, and so back then it was me and a few friends basically, and the Bangla Pesa model got to be kind of famous because in that case it was just businesses creating a mutual voucher, kind of like a mall voucher. So businesses coming together and saying, okay, we are creating credit obligations, like legal credit obligations against these resources that we have. They sign an agreement with the local elders and all this kind of stuff. And they would create $4 worth, of these vouchers. And that got pretty political very quickly. People were trying to pay police bribes with it and stuff like that, and we ended up having to do a bunch of court cases, and that took a long time. And then when that was over, we spread that out to a whole bunch of other communities, that same basic model. And it wasn't until like 2018 or so that the cost of using USSD got to be like below 1 shilling, so we could start doing phone-based transactions, and initially we had a SQL backend, and then eventually we swapped that out for the original POA, the proof of authority network called POA network, that was sort of the predecessor to XDAI, which is now Gnosis chain. And the idea being that, great, we're creating decentralized credit issuance, right? But we don't want that to be totally dependent on us printing these things, which is expensive. And also we don't want it to be totally dependent on some guy running a SQL server, right? And so the idea of, decentralized ledgers, decentralized data, decentralized application layer, like all of that was like, okay, we can't decentralize credit issuance without, making sure that the infrastructure itself isn't decentralized. And it's a lot of, that process and finding out that a lot of these chains, even though they're decentralized in their nodes, they're not decentralized in their tokenomics, right? Like they over create a whole bunch of their vouchers, their gas tokens. They sell those off, and there's people getting rich off of that network, trying to bump up the prices of those tokens. So, I mean, just this last year now, we've got a really great core dev team that is. I mean, right now we're just hacking through Open Ethereum and basically kind of pulling out a lot of these kind of auction-based pricing mechanisms, and we can kind of get into that. But I my sort of definition of a bad voucher system or a bad currency is when you overissue the supply without any clear credit obligation to redeem them, right? Like the US dollar, or lots of different currencies do this, and then you force people into auction-based pricing or supply demand curve. So it's like if I create a billion banana vouchers and I sell those out to a bunch of people, and of course I can't redeem a billion banana vouchers for bananas, but as you come back to me, I say, Antonio, like the highest bidder gets the banana, right? And everyone's like, oh, that sounds like capitalism, it's okay. But actually it's the simplest trick in the book, and that's kind of what most blockchain systems do. Not all of them, but anyways, and so building DAOs on top of these systems and whatnot was just sort of like it's maybe it's such a small cost, these gas tokens and yada yada, but to me there's a bit of deck of cards around that. So being able to run a blockchain, like with the Aurora consensus on Open Ethereum, you can do 70 transactions a second. It's plenty fast with something like 5 to 10 nodes. So literally in Puerto Rico, you could have 5 to 10 nodes running. You could do all your DAOs on it. You could do everything that you can do on Ethereum. You can make a little bridge that connects. Even you can use IBC and connect to Osmosis or connect out. So that's where I am right now. Like all sorts of groups want to dump their tokens on us and say, oh, we'll give you our regen tokens, or we'll give you our beach tokens. But it's sort of, imperialism, if you kind of think about it, right? Because like those tokens, I mean, this is what the British did, right? Like they dumped their shillings on the country, and then all of a sudden, you find yourself in that ecosystem where you now start to need those tokens, right? And even if it's not done intentionally, as a way to sort of capture value, you are sort of giving their token value. And what we're trying to say is that, why shouldn't communities be sovereign? Why can't communities issue their own tokens? And of course they can. And all these excuses of like, oh, you can't run a blockchain because it's going to be too expensive and hard for you. Those are just false. And they're becoming more and more false every day, right? I mean, Igor from XDAI used to tell me, oh, you can't make your own chain. It'll cost you too much and all this kind of stuff. And it was just like, no, actually, we can just copy and paste yours. And actually the DevOps team that needs to run that, like, that's maybe one dude. And, so anyways, I want to encourage you guys to like, be yourself and, create architecture that is both, decentralized from the point of view of, the infrastructure and the nodes, but also power decentralized. Like the non-dominance framework is kind of what we get into a lot. And when we're creating these kind of structures, and we're working in cities, we're starting in Cameroon now as well. It's about resource mapping and bringing together people into a state that says, okay, we can, like, Mileage Plus Miles is a good sort of example of this. I mean, they not that they're the greatest voucher issuance model in general, but they created an ecosystem around pre-sales of their product, right? And that's, like those types of models are perfectly legal. They're very clear. And like if you can establish that there's a strong trust base that you can use these vouchers within a community, there's a lot you can do with that. So that's the basic model. I think it's really simple in a lot of ways. I mean, we add complexity a little bit with things like demurrage, where in the smart contract, so when you create one of these vouchers, it actually has a Gessel tax that's going to a community fund for designed by that group. So if you guys say, okay, we're going to create a voucher, among all these service providers in Puerto Rico, and there's going to be a tax on holding it, You would assign what that tax is, and that tax goes into a fund that you guys vote on. Then you have a DAO for that, right? So that you can vote to see where does that tax get redistributed. Like that's that's the best of both worlds, right? It's a a DAO using a community currency. I think stuff like that's really powerful, and I think like creating DAOs that are just holding ETH or some form of other people's money is also fine and good. That's a resource as well. But starting to think towards this future of networks of resource providers, whether they be nodes or people selling tomatoes, how do they combine together and form a commons? And how does that work? And how do they use it productively? And I think a lot of the people from the community currency world in the past, there was a lot of like isolationism, and not wanting to connect with other tokens. And we don't do that at all. I mean, you can buy a bus ticket. There's nothing wrong with buying a bus ticket. And the bus ticket is backed by the bus seat, right? So the bus ticket and the bus seat are one-to-one to each other always, right? And the market price may vary, but the concept of creating vouchers backed by actual, time, like a 1 minute Boda Boda ride or something like this, or an egg or things like that. Usually what we do in a village, they'll have equivalencies that they'll make between lots of different products, usually at some sort of equivalent market price. Those market prices may vary over time, but they're coming up with their own equivalencies. Yeah, let me pause there and see if there's any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in case nobody else has questions. But so going back to the idea of it's now cheaper than ever to start your own blockchain, and how I feel like the technology moves a lot faster than the culture. So maybe if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you've been able to reach adoption, like for the technical implementation in the communities.
Yeah, so I mean, what we've done is we've made little mini versions of Coinbase so far. So we have like a custodial systems living on top of a decentralized blockchain. We're trying to move away from that. Like hopefully by the end of maybe this year, or probably more realistically next year, we'll have a much more sort of decentralized versions of that, where like users can set custodianship, right? So like I have like a MetaMask account, and I can you already can do some of this stuff, but just making it very easy for them. So what we've done is we basically have some servers sitting at the telecom. We have a relay server that's constantly monitoring all these addresses on the blockchain. They're looking for any changes to happen, and they're firing off changes to the telecom. And so when the telecom gets a message saying, oh, this much was deposited into your account, this guy is going to get an SMS on his phone, and vice versa. So someone with their phone, they're using unstructured supplementary service data, like USSD, which is like a kind of SMS kind of menus. So they'll have like they have a PIN. So when they create an account, they set a PIN, and basically we encrypt their private key by PIN and their phone number. And so yeah, to hack in there. Yeah, I mean it is quite difficult. I see a question popped up here, but basically like the adoption for us has just been make it work at the last mile without having to deal with public-private keys, have simple pins, make really, really simple user interfaces for this stuff. And that means though that someone is taking custodianship generally of these things. And so, moving that custodianship layer, away, or allowing there to be multiple custodians on that same blockchain. That's kind of what we're dealing with right now, and eventually trying to move people off of that USSD system onto other types of interfaces where they do have more custodianship. But going into
it's more of a, we can talk about, in terms of doing the custodial solution now, is it more of is it a lack of education or understanding of like kind of key management, or is it kind of we're still too early? Or all of the above?
I mean, I think a little bit of both, but I mean, to be honest, the main reason for that is that people we're dealing with, like millions and millions and millions of people, have no internet, right? They have like little button Nokia phones, right? So like to key in your full private key or onto that isn't easy, right? So some level of custodianship is, I mean, MetaMask is keeping it in the buffer, right, of your browser, whether or not that's more secure or not, but they don't have browsers, right? So, just fixing that solution. So we came from that point of view, and before that, it was even people without phones at all with paper vouchers, right? So, who's printing those? That's another centralization kind of thing. I see a question here, like why don't we use layer 1, layer 2? Yeah, we have used layer 2s and layer 3s, but the again you're subject to the tokenomics of those creators. So in a community of service providers, if like let's say they're operating nodes on a chain, and you say, okay, well, how many vouchers do we create on this Genesis block? And what does that look like in terms of actual commitment to throughput? If X amount of people start using that gas at the same time, you start having to push people into auction pricing, or like that whole dynamic I find really unhealthy. And so not wanting to deal with making a few devs or whoever started that blockchain rich off the backs of poor people living in slums in Kenya, there's an ethical choice around it. Like, we don't want those types of power structures. So there's no reason not to, have a few universities and a few humanitarian organizations run 5 to 10 nodes. That's enough for the entire country. And they don't need to make any profit off those things. You can still have service fees. I have nothing wrong with service fees for covering costs, but anything above that is rent seeking, right? So we don't want rent seeking. We don't want a bunch of layer 2s making money off of poor people in Africa. And so, like, don't airdrop us your tokens. Like, we don't want them. Like, of course people will raise their hand and be like, oh, give me your tokens. But like, it's a horrible dynamic. And we have the same discussion with the Red Cross and, other types of aid organizations that want to dump their US dollars on villages and say, oh, this is really going to help them. But in the end, it just creates dependency, right? So we want to, decentralize things. And so that's one of the things we want to decentralize is the infrastructure. And so it's really funny to have this conversation so many times in the blockchain space of like, well, why are you decentralizing the infrastructure? It's like, well, what do you mean? Why are we doing that? Anyways, I find this conversation over and over kind of amusing.
So in my mind, models like what Immutable X and others are doing, it's not about selling a token at all. It's more, if you have this group of 10 operators in the country to run that, the only thing what you could do is you basically, on a daily basis, you make a roll-up transaction to a layer 1 chain, and therefore you remove any concerns for that 10 entities to be corrupted over time, and they pay a small fee of like 1 transactions to layer 1, and that's it. So you have all the freedom, you have 10 operators, all the good things you just described. There's no need for a token. They could do a token, but they don't need to, and everything else. I know you have all the benefits with very little downsides because you don't need to trust even the 10 folks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, doing simple bridging is another mechanism for this. I mean, we've been playing around with the IBC protocols, the Cosmos stuff. So imagine you've got, these 10 operators across, this geo region. For them to, be shards of, or to be connected to another 10 over here and another 10 over here, and creating those protocols that connect them together and create actual decentralization. So if we're all connecting to Ethereum, again, is that actual decentralization? And is there decentralization of power in Ethereum? So I get what you're saying. Like, it's always this sort of Faustian deal, right? Like, even in any sort of tech space.
But I'd say, like, if you just connect to other chains, you're always depending on the least security of one of these chains. So if the tokens are issued on the chain with the 10 nodes or 10 operators and you bridge it with IBC to something else, it doesn't help. There's no security guarantee from anyone else besides 10. So I think, I do not know, like our nature is creating certain hierarchies, which is not necessarily like a bad thing. If you believe that the top hierarchy is evil or is not decentralized, that's an issue. But I don't it's the bridges have so many weaknesses that I'm not quite sure that's the answer. And it's a philosophical maybe disagreement of what's decentral or not. But I hear you. But I see the world slightly different.
I'm not, like Cosmos Hub, for instance, like I'm not opposed to there being sort of like organically chosen networks, or centralized networks that people connect in, major hubs and things like that. I am opposed to the power dynamics of those, right? So again, this Ponzi scheme of over issuing ETH, right, without any sort of clear redemption policy, and then forcing people into auction bidding to raise its price over time. I mean, we can get into all kinds of different dynamics for gas issuance, but it does bother me quite a bit in terms of that type of centralization being created around those things. So finding like if there are like let's say we are sharding or we're doing roll-ups to a common super chain or a level 1. Fine. Can we ensure that level 1 isn't a giant Ponzi scheme? How many ETH should be issued on that layer 1, right? And it's a question that I feel like nobody even cares to ask. It's like, oh, let the markets deal with that. And to me, that's absolutely the wrong answer.
Okay, I have a different
Yeah.
opinion here, but I don't want to derail the conversation here. Like,
That's okay.
yeah, no worries.
I posted a question about liquidity pools and how do communities exchange between one another.
Yeah, so right now, I mean, we played around a lot with the early sort of bonding curves and some of the liquidity pools that Bancor put out back in 2018, 2019. And basically, we decided to just get rid of it. And so right now, it's just, a multi-token wallet where you can have many different people's vouchers in your wallet. And you can still have third parties that are creating liquidity pools. I mean, the simplest version of that is the dude on the side of the street that's got, token A and token B in his pocket, and a bunch of token A's come in and he charges you a fee on pulling out some token B's. That would be like a static liquidity pool, right? Where there's a limited supply. Eventually he's going to run out of B's and then he's got to fill back up the B's. There's a lot of different ways that communities are doing this kind of stuff. Now, the idea kind of going forward is, creating different types of bridges, like using IBC to some of these exchanges, and just having a wrapped virtual version of that token. So, I mean, this isn't going to be appropriate for everybody, and there can be, those DEX contracts can live on these smaller chains as well. But if you want to make an exchange between, one of a token that you create in Puerto Rico and you want, an Ethereum, then it would just, you would basically create a wrapped version of that right now on Uniswap, for instance. And that would be a certain type of liquidity pool. That would be, a bonded liquidity pool that has, continuous liquidity. But yeah, I mean, that's the basic idea right now. I mean, I think we're still probably like a year away from anything like that. I mean, for now, people just deal with them as they would vouchers. Like I've got a bunch of Mileage Plus vouchers, and I've got a bunch of, bread shop vouchers, and then I have group vouchers, are created by villages and whatnot.
Yeah, could you maybe describe a little bit more the distinction between somebody who's issuing a mutual credit versus like a community currency?
I mean, I think a mutual credit is a community currency. I mean, community currency is probably the most vague term, but a producer credit would be something like Mileage Plus miles to some degree. Although if you've got basically multiple issuers all issuing at the same time, where you say, okay, we're all going to create this many vouchers against our goods and services, it's a mutual credit obligation from that group of people, right? So if you've got 20 businesses coming in together and they're saying, this is going to be a common voucher among these goods and services, that's one way to approach it. I mean, and that's basically how we're approaching gas on nodes on a blockchain. We're also doing that with mesh networks as well. So you've got 30 people that are operating antennas for this mesh network. So they're all offering a service. We create a voucher against those services, and it's issued out to that group, right? So that each person that's offering services gets a certain amount of these vouchers, and it's up to them. They can sell those vouchers to people, for cash. They can trade them in kind and do kinds of stuff. But it's a pledge against their capacity to redeem those vouchers, right? And so if one of the reasons we have demurrage as well is like if that capacity drops, we can also destroy some of those vouchers as well. So keeping a supply of vouchers that is a claim against the seats on the bus, to me that's sort of the heart of economics. And building economics on top of leveraged devices, leveraged credit instruments, to me is sort of a huge problem that we have right now. And this idea that we're just going to constantly overissue supply of tokens without any clear redemption policy and let quote unquote markets solve that price problem. That's fine in secondary markets, but in the primary market, it's really inappropriate. It creates this massive deck of cards, right? Because if there's nothing fundamentally that's backing these, no service, no guarantee of any sort of quality, no guarantee of any, how fast can I do a block time, or how many, is there a seat on the bus? Then, and then you force people to auction pricing, as they start lining up to come to your validator or come to your bus. You say, okay, the highest bid wins. That creates a certain type of society, and we've basically allowed that type of Ponzi scheme, and we've basically accepted that as a form of capitalism, and that's the Kool-Aid.
So maybe you could go into I guess my original question was, are these vouchers being denominated in the local community currency, and I guess is it a personal appraisal of how much you value your work? So like the Serafu, the SRF, right? So that's what services are being denominated in? No,
the vouchers are denominated in goods or services offered, right? So a bus ticket is denominated in bus seats. It could be sold for shillings at different prices, right? I don't know if that makes sense. So for instance, in a village, like you would have a voucher that's the unit of account would be, it could be a combination of things where you say like 1 minute of boda boda transport and 1 egg. Both of those things in a current market rates are like 10 shillings, right? And so people come up with equivalencies around it. But the idea is that, I like the term exergy. It's like delivered energy is usually kind of the gist of it. You're providing some kind of service, and that's the fundamental unit of account that community is dealing with. And if they're, the next village has a very different unit of account, yeah, they might need some sort of bonding curve-esque type of exchange system. But generally, they're all about the same types of stuff. So like one of these units in one village will be, just about the same price as others, but they're backed by those specific goods and services on offer by the issuing group. So it's like a mall voucher that's backed by specific things you can buy in the mall. Like your bus ticket, the bus company's not going to buy those back off of you usually. Very rare occasion. They're not obligated to anyways. And so that concept of a credit obligation and, backed with actual services. And this is why I keep bringing up gas tokens, because ideally a gas token is backed by some function being provided by the blockchain, right? There's block validation going on. That's a useful service, right? And the same goes with a mesh network. Like there's useful services being offered by these different, people running antennas, right? We can measure those services, how much throughput went through, right? That was a certain amount of service. How many tomatoes were on offer? So that being a fundamental sort of unit, and then building, you can still create leveraged instruments and things like that on top of these things. But the idea of like a basic understanding credit obligations, I think is really important, because once you get out of credit obligation mode, and you start overissuing and overissuing without clear obligation, then you're in commodity mode. Your money becomes, and so a lot of criticism of Bitcoin and a lot of these, gas tokens is that they've full on become collectible commodities and are hoarded, and there's really no, it's not a contract anymore. It's not an agreement. There's no living agreement. It's more like Donald Duck sitting on a pile of gold. And commodity money, if you're going to use that as a medium of exchange, as currency now, well, that creates a history of horrible dynamics. And we can get into Bretton Woods and Keynes and all this, the horror of commodity money over the years, what it's created.
So going back to the service aspect, I research a lot into natural capital backed currencies, wondering kind of if you have thought about that, or how does that fit into the mutual credit / CIC dynamic?
Yeah, I just quick on mutual credit. Like usually the term mutual credit is, it's a pretty loosely and not well defined term, but it generally means like, a bunch of people mutually defining the value for X, Y, and Z services. So, thinking of it as like a commons, common pool resources of these, individuals coming in, and they're creating a credit against that. There's a lot of like nomenclature around, or verbiage around, like everyone starting at a zero balance and going up and down. To me, that's a UX issue. It has nothing to do with the actual credit that's created. The credit, you generally have a max negative balance in these systems. And that's the actual amount of credit that was created. But in terms of like the natural resource management or natural resource like carbon credits and these kinds of things, is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's kind of, carbon credits are kind of like the most obvious one, but going back to like the permaculture playbook, where it could even just be like a pile of soil. Yeah.
What we're trying to do right now is a lot of like measurement of that stuff. So, the NFT space where you have like data claims and impact claims. And so, we work with like UNICEF, for instance. And so like a lot of the circulation of vouchers constitutes something like a sustainable development goal, right? So, helping children, for instance, or like education, right? So we can show the volume of trade within Puerto Rico or within some community and say, look, within the last 3 months, we can validate, with these endorsements on chain, with these transaction hashes, we can, here's a visualization of all of this good stuff that's happened in Puerto Rico. It's wonderful. And if you're going to support this, right, you're going to get a copy that says that, you have an NFT showing that, this NFT was worth this much money of those impacts, right? And those impacts could be carbon sequestration. And so that's kind of the way that we've been approaching it. It's just measuring those things, showing proof that we've measured them, creating, quote unquote, impact claims about them, and then creating copies of those impact claims that have been supported, and making sure that that's all on chain. So we see that UNICEF supported X amount for that impact claim, and everyone can see that. And UNICEF goes away with a copy of that NFT that they're holding now that says that it's their certificate saying that they supported these impact claims. They can show their donors. There could be secondary markets for those. Those can include carbon. They can include this tree or anything like that. So that's the way we've sort of approached those things. We haven't like created currencies based on those things. We basically say that the currencies are based on credit obligations, right? They're obligations for people or institutions to do X and Y and Z services. Those could be environmental services, by the way. So you could have an environmental service, token that is created, just in the way we're talking about as mutual credit around those services. Those could be purchased and used to support and those impact claims. Right. So we've kind of separated those two things out, right? So we have like the mutual credit community currency side, and then we have, evidence of good stuff that are collectible items, that people might want. Those are our NFT space. So you have your, fungible and non-fungible tokens.
I see. And do you see, because I kind of feel like you mentioned it before, like the Grameen Bank kind of like microloan revolution or like epiphany. do you see more philanthropy coming to you, coming for like these kinds of services, or is it still kind of early on?
I mean, there's a lot of work. I mean, what we've done in like to get a lot of the humanitarian space involved. And I mean, we're working with all kinds of like Red Cross and UNICEF and World Food Program and GIZ, and then smaller foundations. And what we did originally was, I mean, this is easy to do in Kenya because there's so many failed projects, but we would end up in a neighborhood or a village with a failed, or a ex Red Cross program that was, there to solve a crisis, and they dumped a bunch of money in training, but then nothing happened and all the money's gone, and like that story over and over and over. That's like the typical and for us to go in there and say, well, we can actually, let's create this economy and let's show the Red Cross, bring them back and show them a thriving community that they had left 5-10 years ago, with nothing after spending so much money, showing this impact data. Really, that's in some sense, that's our main way that we're subsidizing a lot of these programs. We also have a service token as well, right? So like we have our own voucher for our services as Grassroots Economics to do trainings and to help people create their tokens, their vouchers. But that's, like it's really, really very small. Basically, it's a training tool, right? So we give people out these tokens called Sarafu. They can use those, they can collect them together to create their own token now, right? So there's basically like a service fee on that. But most of our funding comes from showing impacts, right? So, I mean, even in the past, just, pulling down the transaction history along with metadata around the users, getting it validated, getting, Red Cross to come and see that, yeah, like this community just did, 1 million shillings of trade this last year, and that's, 10x what they were doing before. And doing a lot of studies has been really important, like showing, like having control groups and different treatment groups to show these impacts over time has been, I mean, we've got a lot of stuff if you look at our research page on grassecon.org. Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned kind of like the failed project from these like broken systems, and we have John Carlos who just joined the call. John, are you there? John Carlos has worked for Puerto Rico, basically, with the bankruptcy deal. So it's interesting to see, when communities run out of money, what happens. John Carlos, maybe you have like any questions for Will. I'd be interested to hear your opinion, even though you came in a little late in the call.
Good morning, everyone. How are you, Will? Everything is good?
Good. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
I entered to a call a little late because I was working in my regular job. So sorry for that. To be honest, I don't have anything to say yet, but I am here to learn a little bit about the project and how I can contribute to the project. My past experience was related to like Antonio mentioned, related to the government, especially in preparing the fiscal plan and also the budgets. And the budget includes the utilities of Puerto Rico, the PREPA, yeah. Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, and also PRASA, is the water utility, as well the one that are related to the highways and that kind of stuff. And something that Antonio mentioned is that we have a lot of liquidity at some point, and we had to do a lot of adjustment in the government, especially to trying to find additional capital of funds. So I am here trying to help you guys, and anything that you need, just let me know. I am just want to hear it before say something, because I prefer to do that. But I'm really grateful for being here. So thank you everyone as well to be here, and I just want to participate and try to understand better the project in order to give some contribution at this point.
I remind me of the way we've been working with some of these local government groups here is that we have so the vouchers are issued in some cases against like public utilities, so that there's a local water source, right? So here's a voucher that's created by the community or by the local city, for access to that local. So like your electricity tokens, if you're in a big city, sometimes you have those, or your bus tickets and things like that. So creating a voucher against municipal resources or municipal services in a city, I feel like that's sort of a no-brainer. What we've added to that is the ability for them to be tradable, so they can actually circulate. And then secondly, we have a tax on them, and that tax goes, you can decide where the tax goes, but presumably it can go back to the local government, right? Whoever's maintaining those services. And the way we do that, so instead of a transaction fee, we have what's called a Gessel tax. Sometimes it's called a demurrage, and it's basically a tax on holding, like a holding tax. Like if you have a boat at the port, the longer it sits at the port, the more tax you pay,
This is a very Charles Eisenstein sacred economics demurrage.
I think it was like Silvio Gesell was one of the first guys, Italian economist that started talking about it. And his theory was that money should decay. Like we should not have, money should not be the store of value at all. Like as much as we can kill that function, the better, because we want the store of value to be society. We want it to be education and infrastructure. Anyway, so he had a lot of philosophy around it, but a lot of, Keynes wanted this to happen. So like his version of what should have happened at Bretton Woods was a demurrage based unit of account, as like a global unit of account that was based on commodities. So a lot of Keynes stuff. If you look at some of my YouTube videos, you'll see a chapter that was spoken out loud by Matthew Slater talking about Bretton Woods. If you search for me on YouTube, and you'll find this. It's really interesting to hear the history of this. But anyways, it's been tried in municipalities with really good success. Even throughout history, the idea of having municipal resource backed currency, it's just a voucher that can circulate, and it has a tax, an automatic tax. No one has to pay the tax. It happens automatically. Oh, hold on. Sorry, guys. Are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we're still here.
So anyways, I think it's a great thing. I love demurrage. I highly recommend it. I think it's a really interesting thing to look at. And for a municipality, I think it's a total no-brainer. So you can do two things with these tokens. A municipality can raise funds by selling some of their utility tokens, and they can tax them once they're in circulation. So, even trying that on a small scale somewhere in Puerto Rico or whatever, I think it's, can be done on any blockchain or any system that they want to use. I would recommend they make their own, and if they want to roll up to a layer 1 chain, that's also fine, as everyone mentioned as well, for security. But I'm also not worried, a 20 network, a 20 server blockchain that's run by independent parties. Honestly, I'm not that worried about that being hacked. And I guess I come from the world of SQL databases, right, where it was just one. So, we'll see. I think there's a lot of, our devs have this kind of discussions all the time around, network security. But anyways, I would say go for independence. Don't get stuck using someone else's blockchain.
Did you hear that? Yeah. Well, go for independence.
Yeah, totally. I don't do what El Salvador did. Don't, let your politicians get bought and convinced to use a token that's owned 90% by people outside the country as their currency. That's what the British did. That's colonialism. Right, that's an imperialistic technique, and it's horrible. So there's no reason El Salvador couldn't create their own blockchain. Even if they, if you want 500 nodes at every university in El Salvador running a node, I think the security issue is a little bit overwrought. You could have backups of state. You could have all kinds of different systems that support that. But I just, if you want decentralized credit issuance or decentralization in terms of money, then you really need to have much better decentralization of power and infrastructure. So
I completely agree with you. And also some of the situation that we have, this is super confidential, right? So something that I identify in the government is that same situation that you are mentioning about the centralized the funds. They have several accounts in different banks, for different reasons, funds that we even cannot identify in this debt restructuring process. So that is something that will be really helpful. But more than that is the main thing for me is trying to be able to help you guys to try to put this up for the public. As you mentioned, this there has to be something for the people, and I completely agree in that part because it's going to change everything, and that is the way that I see it. This is something that can be you have a standard funds, let's say that has the same value in any part of the world, and that is really important because you can make a lot of changes with that.
Yeah.
You know, the bureaucratic process of the money or the visas or that kind of stuff. So I am really interested to put my knowledge and anything else for the benefit of this project.
Yeah. The way before you got on, we were talking about like the interface for the phones and what we've done in Kenya, because most people do not have a smartphone and most people don't have internet at all. And so what we do is we give access via USSD. So it's like an SMS system. So, and it's super simple. It's like hit 1 to send, put the phone number of who you want to send to, put the amount, put your PIN, and then both parties will get an SMS. So it's really, really, simple. I mean, there's problems with that because then you end up with centralization on this sort of custodial system on the passwords. So getting past that problem and dealing with different kinds of Android phones and stuff like that. Our lead architect won't own a phone. He hates phones, and so like for these reasons you're talking about. So like having a solution of a cheap phone that people can use that can store their own private keys. I've seen projects like this, but they're still too expensive for us. But I would love to. I think the next big, project with, we need to start investing in that kinds of stuff, and even like local production of those types of phones would be amazing as well, if possible. Yeah.
It's interesting here because on the island, people use it's called ATH, and it's just a mobile payment. So everybody you can send it to somebody's cell phone number, scan a QR code.
To the super similar.
Yeah, I would just do that. I mean, that's we've reached 60-something thousand users like that. We would not have reached them otherwise, just in this last year. And I can't, I mean, if they had to download an app at all, I don't think it would work.
And what's looking forward? What do you see as kind of the testing ground for building on Cosmos, or where are you guys at in the planning or the deployment stage?
I think that's in the interchain communication stuff, right? So like the bridging. I mean, we have a bit of like tech debt, using Solidity right now. So we've looked at some other like Evmos, and there is some like Ethereum, like Solidity, like crossovers, like where you can use your Ethereum stuff on their backend. And then there's just, creating different types of that, using the IBC bridging in order to connect out, right? So if we can connect to Cosmos Hub, well, then we can connect to Osmosis and also even Ethereum once we're there. So I think, in terms of, Ruan mentioned like the bridging contracts kind of suck. And I agree, like they're sort of like little mini blockchains by themselves with really just like two people holding the bridge. They're not great. And so IBC has some better solutions to that. I think we eventually do need to get off of Solidity. It's just, we don't have right now a bunch of like Cosmos or Golang or Rust devs that can really do that right now. I'm just in terms of bottleneck. So that's the biggest thing. We're hoping like some of the guys at like Informal Systems, like Ethan Buckman and those guys are going to start, building some of the toolkits. So it's be very easy for us to sort of just port over. So if there was a Cosmos blockchain where literally we could just port over our users, because we have all their private keys anyways. We've moved blockchains 3 times, right? So that's very powerful, by the way. If you can, I mean, it's good and bad, but it was good because we were on a bunch of crappy blockchains that kept, bumping up their gas prices. And so like we had to get off those. So, now we've sort of learned better and now we're on our own. So, the next move will be much easier in some sense, but I'm happy that we've maintained that independence and ability to do that. But being able to jump onto or migrate into another architecture shouldn't be that hard at this point. And we'll see. I mean, once we get into the point where like most of our users or a lot of them start having or holding their own private keys, it gets to be more tricky, right? Because now we can't port them over, right? It becomes much more hard. So yeah, but I mean, we're still sort of in that sweet spot right now, and I think we've got like kind of another year to sort of settle into where we are in terms of hardening a lot of the different systems. We're also working with Swarm a lot from the data layer. And yeah, we'll see. So I hope within this year we have some kind of like really good mechanism of bridging or using like IBC or doing rollups like Rowan was mentioning. Yeah.
Well, it seems like it'll be a good time to build after the hype gas fees go down.
Yeah, well, I mean, now we're in the state where we're making those gas fees just simple service. I mean, we're just doing it ourselves now, right? So we don't have to. There's no sell off of a bunch of gas tokens going on. That's not there's no profit model.
Well, I mean, in the next market down cycle, a lot of the pumped up gas chains will just collapse, but Grassroots will be chugging along.
Yeah, exactly. We're sort of untouched by that, which is nice. Yeah.
Great. Well, I feel like we covered a lot of stuff. It's been an hour. Just want to thank you again, Will, for coming on. I thought this was really informational and happy to connect more. So I'm looking forward to like continuing the conversation.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a lot of potential here in Puerto Rico and how to implement some of these new primitives, and that's kind of why we have this group, and the community on the island is growing a lot. So very hopeful, and thank you again for your knowledge.
Nice. Yeah. Cheers, guys. I'm looking forward. If you need any advice, just let me know. And I'm really, one thing we didn't mention was like the realm of like personal tokens, just making that easy for people. And, like just the concept of voucher, I don't think people really, if Carlos like says, I'm going to create this amount of tokens against, hours of my consulting services. Like there's a really cool empowerment process around that, like unionization, creating communities around that. That's super powerful as well. So I think, just taking this concept of service provision, whether it's municipal, individual, or group, and expressing that as your value, and then sharing it with people, like that's the heart of economics, really. It should be, and we can make that real. And I think that's super exciting.
Very powerful. Well, thank you again. Have a nice day. And we'll everybody go to grassecon.org to check out the project more.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for including me, Antonio, and thank you.
What's that like?
Good to see you guys. That was very enlightening. I really appreciate it. In terms of like someone coming in, Antonio was kind of my first gateway to learning about all of this. I come from like more of an accounting background, traditional accounting. If I'm starting on day zero, where is the best place to go to start ramping up? Because a lot of this went over my head. There was a lot of pieces that I was able to grasp onto in terms of just like general economics.
That was my same question, because I cannot understand more and less about the topics and that kind of stuff. But it's really good as a background, because I am an accountant as well. So
I find it generally fascinating. I don't know, Antonio, I know that our longer conversations were a great first introduction, but for Antonio or Will, if you have any great resources of like, where do you start on day zero, books to read, videos or movies to watch, other than, following along, which I will, on the websites, I'd be, greatly appreciated if you could send those along.
My favorite book right now is The End of Finance by Fantasi and Amato. It was done in 2013. And it's just beautiful book. He goes through basically our entire history of how we went from different like gold standard through Bretton Woods and what happened from World War I and World War II and like where we are today, and it talks about these really like fundamentals of what is credit money versus commodity money, And I think it's super important. I think he really captures it. And there's some, if you go to my YouTube, or actually, Matthew Slater, mattslats.net, he did a really cool, he like an audio version of this. So you can listen to it while you're taking a walk in the morning, which is what I did. So I really love the book. What is Money is the first chapter, and is the End of Finance is the book. I just love it. Otherwise, I think looking at how things like mileage plus miles work, I think is really important. Mileage plus miles makes $20 million in revenue. And the airline only makes 10 million. It's a hugely lucrative program, right? There's bad things about it, of course, but the concept of promissory notes, credit obligations as legal credit obligations that can be reassigned and be fungible and be divisible, just that realm of things, I feel like that's the key. So if you can really understand the fact that Carlos can make a token against his business or his value, and you could do that mutually with many people at the same time. I think if you start studying vouchers and credit obligation, and things like mileage plus, I think that's really the key. And for municipalities to do things like that, there's a huge history of this stuff. I mean, Bernard Leotar writes a whole bunch of books that are maybe a little bit less academic and are more fun, where he talks about examples of, like in Japan, of vouchers that are made for supporting the elderly, for instance, and things like that.
I really have a good book about municipality, because
Cool.
as I mentioned, I work for them in some point, so I can share with you, Mike, if you can put your email, or if
Sure.
I can share with you the book in PDF for education purposes, but it's like we'll say it's academic book, but it's going to help you to understand and maybe the tax and that kind of stuff that are really good to understand at this point.
Cool.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Will, for your time. And I'll follow the email. I think was shared in the meetups, right? So I can follow there. Very fast.
Yeah, there's a little chat window.
Cool.
All right, great.
Not to extend this either, but I think I would love to poke around, and maybe Antonio, this is separately, but on how insurance in areas like Africa with larger agriculture, if that has been taken a play with cryptocurrencies in any way, right? So I assume there's got to be large agricultural farming that doesn't have access to traditional insurance. And if cryptocurrency does have some sort of a model, or if it's even entered that ecosystem yet. I don't want to drag this call out, but maybe for a future one, I would love to see if that's a possibility, or if it's even being thought of yet.
Yeah. I mean, we're augmenting. There's a program called R4 with the World Food Program, and they are looking at the usage of community currencies to increase payback of insurance, crop insurance.
Cool.
So a WR4 program. But in terms of them using crypto or whatnot directly, no, it's more like using our crypto as a credit score.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I see you sharing photos on Twitter, Will, of the regenerative farming.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's sort of like, there's one side of us that's like grassroots economics is like building these tools, right? Like the community currencies is a tool, but what do we do with them now? And to me, that's the biggest thing that we need to do is regenerative agriculture. So bring back the soil, bring back the trees, regreening, creating food forests. So I'm really into syntropic agroforestry, which comes from Brazil. Ernest Gulch there. Anyways, I'm impressed with that method. I think it's been the only one that I've seen really work. I mean, we've done it on Western Kenya where it's more wet, and it's amazing there. In the arid regions, we had to really take a deep breath and be like, okay, it's going to take 10 years, and we're doing starting with aloe veras and that kind of regenerative with really degraded soils. But using a community currency or a credit obligation against that future production was a way to get everyone to work, right? we're all going to work on this because we own shares of its production, right? So it's just a cooperative model, and it's really simple. It's the same as what Mileage Plus does, really, in some ways. It's just saying, anyone can do that. It's just simple, stupid vouchers,
Mhm.
Cheers.
Well, we'll have to. Are you growing coffee in Kenya?
No, it's not. In the higher altitude Kenya they do, but none of the places we are growing coffee. But that would be cool. Yeah, we could do an exchange.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, I think it's time. We've had a lot of fun, and I'll upload this video on YouTube so we can share it around. And yeah, just looking forward to seeing where we end up next.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
You,
so much.
everybody.
Thanks, Antonio.
Pleasure to meet you.
You too.
See you guys.
Cheers.